Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we venture into the forgotten corners of America's national parks. Vast wilderness where towering forests, endless mountains, and isolated trails stretch for miles without a single sign of civilization. Hidden within these silent landscapes are 7 disturbing encounters, terrifying stories from hikers, campers, and rangers who stepped into places where help does not reach. And something in the wilderness was watching. If you are new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of these remote national parks, where civilization ends and terror begins. My name is Daniel Carter, and this happened in the summer of 2018 when my friend Josh and I decided to hike one of the most remote trails in Yellowstone National Park. Josh had always been obsessed with wilderness exploration. He worked as a wildlife photographer, and his dream was to capture something truly rare in the wild. I was just there for the adventure. The trail we chose wasn't popular. In fact, the ranger station warned us that very few hikers used it anymore. It stretched deep into a thick forest valley where cell service disappeared within minutes. That was exactly why Josh wanted to go. Places like this, he said while tightening his backpack straps, are where you actually find things. At the time, I thought he meant rare animals. But looking back now, I'm not sure that's what he meant at all. The first few hours of the hike were peaceful. Pine trees towered above us, and the only sounds were the wind moving through branches and distant birds. But sometime around late afternoon, we realized something else was out there with us. Something moving, something following. The first sign was subtle. Josh stopped walking and raised his hand for silence. At first, I thought he had spotted an animal for a photograph, but his expression looked different. His face was tense, like he was trying to listen very carefully. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I shook my head. For a few seconds, the forest was completely quiet. Then we heard it, a branch snapping somewhere behind us. It sounded heavy, not like a squirrel or bird, something larger. "Probably a deer," I said, trying to sound confident. Josh didn't respond. Instead, he slowly turned his head and looked down the trail we had just walked. The trees were thick, creating deep shadows between them. And for just a moment, I thought I saw something tall moving between the trunks, not running, not walking normally, just slowly stepping deeper into the forest the moment we looked. Josh lifted his camera, zooming into the trees. But whatever it was had already disappeared. Josh lowered the camera slowly, still staring into the forest like he expected something to step back out. "What did you see?" he asked quietly. I hesitated before answering. "I'm not sure. Maybe a person?" That possibility made both of us uncomfortable. We were miles from the nearest road, deep inside a rarely used trail. Seeing another hiker here would have been strange, but at least it would have made sense. Josh shook his head. "If it was a person," he said, "why hide?" That question sat heavily between us. We continued hiking, but the atmosphere had changed completely. The forest no longer felt peaceful. Every rustling leaf made my heart jump. After another 20 minutes, the trail narrowed into a rocky slope surrounded by thick pine trees. That was when we heard the sound again, another branch snapping, closer this time. Josh turned quickly, raising his camera, but the trees behind us were still, silent, watching. And suddenly I realized something that made my stomach drop. Whatever had snapped that branch was now much closer than before. Okay, "That's not normal," Josh muttered. We both stood still, listening. The forest had gone completely quiet again. Even the wind seemed to stop. Josh slowly slung his camera over his shoulder and whispered, "Let's keep moving." We picked up our pace. The trail curved downhill through a thick cluster of trees, and the sunlight started fading as evening approached. That was when we heard footsteps. Not animal footsteps, human ones. Heavy, deliberate, matching our speed somewhere behind us. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. A cold chill ran down my spine. Josh looked back toward the trees and called out loudly, "Hello? Anyone out there?" No response, only silence. Then suddenly, from somewhere deep in the forest behind us, a low, distorted sound echoed through the trees. It almost sounded like a voice trying to form words, but the tone was wrong, too deep, too unnatural. Josh and I looked at each other, and without saying anything, we both started walking faster. By the time the sun began dipping behind the mountains, the forest around us had grown darker than it should have been. Josh checked the map on his phone, though we both knew the signal had disappeared hours ago. "Our campsite should be about another mile," he said. I nodded, but my attention kept drifting toward the trees behind us. Every few minutes, we would hear it again. A quiet step, a branch shifting, leaves crunching somewhere just out of sight. It never rushed toward us. It never made a clear move. It simply followed. The worst part was how patient it seemed. As we rounded a bend in the trail, the forest opened into a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. In the center stood an old wooden sign marking the official campsite. Josh let out a small breath of relief. "Good," he said. "We'll set up here." But as we stepped into the clearing, I glanced back toward the tree line, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. A tall shape standing between two trees, watching us. "Josh," I whispered. He turned and followed my gaze toward the trees. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. The figure was tall, taller than any person I had ever seen in the woods. At first glance, it looked human. But something about the proportions felt wrong. Its arms seemed too long, its posture too stiff, and the way it stood there, perfectly still, made it look less like a person and more like something pretending to be one. Josh slowly raised his camera. The moment he lifted it to his eye, the figure stepped backward. Not quickly, not like someone startled, just one slow step into the darkness between the trees. Then another, and then it was gone. Josh lowered the camera slowly. "Did you see that?" he whispered. I nodded. But the truth was, what scared me the most wasn't what we had seen. It was the feeling that the thing hadn't left. It had simply moved somewhere closer. Josh and I stood there in silence for a few seconds after the figure disappeared into the trees. Neither of us said what we were thinking, but we both knew the same thought had crossed our minds. We were not alone out here. Josh finally forced a small laugh, trying to break the tension. "Probably just another hiker messing with us," he said. But his voice lacked confidence. We quickly started setting up the tent. The sky above the trees had turned a deep orange, and darkness was creeping through the forest faster than either of us liked. While Josh worked on the tent poles, I gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing. That was when I noticed something strange. Footprints. They were pressed deep into the dirt near the tree line. At first glance, they looked human. But the longer I stared at them, the more wrong they seemed. Each print was too long, too narrow, and the toes looked stretched, almost like something had forced its feet into a shape that didn't quite belong. And they were all facing one direction, toward our campsite. I called Josh over. He crouched beside me and stared at the footprints for a long moment. "Those aren't animal tracks," he said quietly. "Yeah," I noticed. We followed the line of prints with our eyes. They came out of the forest, crossed halfway into the clearing, and then suddenly stopped. "Why would someone walk barefoot out here?" I asked. Josh didn't answer. Instead, he slowly looked up toward the dark wall of trees surrounding the campsite. The fire we had started crackled behind us, throwing flickering light across the clearing. For a moment, everything felt calm again. Then the forest answered. From somewhere beyond the trees, a low sound echoed through the woods. It wasn't a howl, it wasn't a growl. It sounded closer to a voice, a deep, distorted voice trying to copy a human sound. And then it said something, very slowly, very clearly. "Hello?" Josh and I froze, because that voice sounded exactly like mine. The moment that voice echoed through the trees, my entire body went cold. Josh stared at me like he had just seen a ghost. "Did you just say that?" he whispered. I shook my head immediately. "No." We both turned slowly toward the forest. The fire crackled behind us, casting long, flickering shadows across the ground. Beyond the clearing, the trees stood like a solid black wall. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then we heard it again. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate. They circled just beyond the edge of the clearing, moving somewhere in the darkness where the firelight couldn't reach. Josh grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the trees. The beam cut through the darkness, but revealed nothing. Then the voice came again. This time it didn't whisper. It spoke louder, clearer. "Josh." My stomach dropped, because the voice that had just called his name was Josh's own voice. And the real Josh standing next to me had gone completely pale. Josh grabbed my arm. "We're leaving," he said immediately. Neither of us cared about the tent anymore. We shoved our gear into our backpacks as fast as we could. The fire still burned behind us, lighting the clearing in shaky orange light. Then the forest went silent again. Too silent. As we started backing away from the campsite, Josh suddenly froze. "What?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just slowly pointed toward the tree line. I followed his finger. At first, I didn't see anything. Then the firelight shifted, and something stepped forward from the darkness. The thing standing between the trees looked almost human, but its body was too tall, its arms hung too low, and its face was hidden in shadow. Then it spoke again. "Daniel." My blood turned to ice, because this time, the voice wasn't copying Josh. It was copying me. And the worst part? As we slowly backed away from the clearing, the thing took a step forward, and another, still repeating our voices, still learning them, like it was practicing, before deciding which one of us it wanted to become. My name is Ethan Walker, and this happened in 2016 when I accepted a temporary summer job as a fire lookout in one of the most remote sections of Glacier National Park. The job sounded perfect at the time. I had always loved solitude, and spending 3 months alone in a fire tower deep in the mountains felt like a dream. My responsibility was simple. Watch the forest for signs of smoke and report any fires. The ranger station warned me that the tower I would be stationed in was extremely isolated. The nearest ranger cabin was almost 12 miles away, and the trail leading up to the tower was rarely used anymore. Still, I wasn't worried. The first day I hiked up the mountain, the tower came into view through the trees. It was an old wooden structure perched high on a rocky ridge, overlooking miles of endless forest. From up there, you could see the entire valley. What I didn't know then was that the previous fire lookout who worked that tower had quit suddenly, and no one would tell me why. The climb up to the tower took nearly 4 hours. By the time I reached the top, the sun was already dipping low behind the mountains, painting the entire valley in deep orange light. The fire tower itself looked older than I expected. The wood creaked beneath my boots as I stepped inside, and the small cabin at the top smelled like dust and pine. But the view was incredible. From the windows, I could see miles of untouched forest stretching across the valley floor. No roads, no houses, just wilderness. Inside the tower were only a few things: a small bed, a radio, a stove, and a set of binoculars mounted near the window. While unpacking my gear, I noticed something strange. Carved into the wooden wall near the bed were several deep scratch marks. At first, I thought they were just old damage from years of use. But when I looked closer, the scratches weren't random. They formed tally marks, dozens of them. Like someone had been counting something, or someone had been counting days. I stared at those tally marks for a long time. There had to be at least 60 of them scratched into the wood. Each mark was deep, almost aggressively carved, like whoever made them had been pressing the knife harder every single day. I tried to laugh it off. Probably just some bored ranger, I muttered to myself. Still, something about them bothered me. The tower was silent except for the wind pushing against the wooden walls. Being that high up meant the wind never really stopped. It made the entire structure creak slowly, like an old ship floating on water. That night was my first shift watching the forest. Around midnight, I sat near the window with the binoculars, scanning the darkness for any glow of fire on the horizon. That was when I noticed something strange down in the valley. A small light. At first, I assumed it was a camper's fire. But as I watched it through the binoculars, the light suddenly moved. Not like someone walking, more like something running. And it was moving far too fast for a person. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The light darted between the trees far below, weaving through the forest in quick bursts before disappearing behind the hills. I lowered the binoculars and rubbed my eyes. Maybe it was just another ranger moving through the valley with a flashlight. But when I picked the binoculars back up again, the light was gone. The valley had returned to complete darkness. I sat there for another 10 minutes, watching the same area, but nothing appeared again. Eventually, I convinced myself it had been nothing, just a reflection, or maybe someone hiking late. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling in my chest. Around 2 in the morning, the wind picked up harder, rattling the windows of the tower. That was when I heard the first footstep, a slow, heavy step on the wooden stairs below the cabin. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again. Another step. Someone, or something, was climbing the tower. The first thing that ran through my mind was relief. Another ranger must have come up the trail. Maybe someone from the station was checking in on me. The thought made sense. After all, this tower had been empty for weeks before I arrived. "Hello?" I called down the staircase. My voice echoed slightly through the wooden structure. No answer. But the footsteps continued. Slow, heavy. Each step creaked loudly as weight pressed down on the old wooden stairs. I stepped closer to the stairwell and leaned over the railing, trying to see down the narrow spiral of steps. The lantern light from the cabin barely reached halfway down. Below that, there was only darkness. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. The footsteps stopped instantly. The silence that followed was unbearable. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then, slowly, one more step echoed from the darkness below. But this time it sounded different. Not like someone climbing upward. It sounded like someone had turned around and started walking back down. I stood there listening until the final creak of the stairs faded into silence. Whoever, or whatever, had been on the tower had just left. But that didn't make any sense. The only way down was the same narrow staircase, and I hadn't heard the door at the bottom open. My heart was beating faster now. I grabbed the lantern and slowly began walking down the steps. Each stair groaned under my weight as I descended. The tower felt colder the lower I went. When I finally reached the bottom platform, the front door stood exactly where I had left it. Closed, locked from the inside. I stared at it for a moment, trying to understand. Then something on the wall beside the door caught my attention. More scratch marks, just like the ones upstairs. But these were different. These weren't tallies. They were words. 3 words carved deeply into the wood. And judging by the rough lines, whoever carved them had been in a hurry. The words said, "It comes at night." I stared at those carved words for a long time. It comes at night. The letters were jagged and uneven, like someone had scratched them in a panic. I ran my fingers across the grooves in the wood. They were deep enough that whoever carved them must have used a knife or something sharp. For a moment, I considered radioing the ranger station to ask about it. But the thought of explaining something like this felt ridiculous. So instead, I locked the door again and climbed back up the tower stairs. The higher I went, the more the wind pushed against the wooden structure, making the entire tower sway slightly. By the time I returned to the cabin at the top, the forest outside had turned completely black. Midnight had passed. I sat by the window with the binoculars again, scanning the valley. For nearly an hour, nothing moved. Then suddenly, the same light from earlier appeared again. But this time it wasn't in the valley. It was much closer, somewhere in the trees at the bottom of the tower. My stomach tightened as I focused the binoculars. The light flickered between the trees, moving slowly through the forest like someone walking with a lantern. Except there was something strange about it. The light moved too smoothly, almost like it was gliding rather than being carried. I kept watching as it approached the base of the tower hill. Then it stopped, completely still. I waited. 1 minute passed, then 2. The light didn't move. Finally, I lowered the binoculars and leaned closer to the window, trying to see with my own eyes. That was when the light suddenly went out. The forest below vanished into darkness. And then I heard it, a loud crack echoing from the base of the tower, followed by a slow, heavy step. The same sound I had heard earlier on the stairs. Except this time, it wasn't inside the tower. It was outside. And something very large had just started climbing up toward me. My heart pounded as I stepped back from the window. The heavy thuds of something enormous climbing the tower's wooden beams echoed through the night. I grabbed the only weapon I had, a small hatchet that sat on the stove, and held it tightly. The lantern flickered as the wind slammed against the cabin walls, throwing shadows that danced like monsters across the floor. Each creak of the tower made me flinch. Then, from above the door, I saw it, a shadow stretching across the ceiling, a huge, distorted form moving with unnatural speed. It wasn't climbing like a human. It was sliding along the walls, creeping upward toward me silently, except for the occasional creak of old wood under its weight. I realized then that the carvings, the tally marks, the warnings, they weren't left by someone ordinary. They were left by a person or a ranger who had survived encounters like this and had tried to leave messages for the next person. And now, I was the next one. I backed away slowly, gripping the hatchet, my eyes never leaving the shadow. The wind howled through broken window panes, carrying a faint whisper that seemed almost human. Then it spoke, a deep, rasping voice that somehow sounded familiar, like a memory I had never lived. "You can't leave? Not tonight?" The tower shook violently, throwing me off balance. I stumbled, hitting the wooden railing, and the lantern fell. Its light flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Total darkness. I could hear it moving now, closer, circling the cabin, its breathing heavy, unnatural. I swung the hatchet blindly, but there was nothing to hit. And then I heard a voice. My own voice, coming from the darkness. It was whispering, mocking me, echoing my thoughts. By morning, the search party found the tower empty. No signs of a struggle, no tracks. Just the hatchet on the floor and the tally marks carved deeper than ever. And the radio had one message, repeated over and over. "It comes at night." My name is Lila Thompson, and this happened during a solo camping trip in Sequoia National Park back in 2019. I had always loved camping alone. The idea of being completely surrounded by nature, with no one else around, felt freeing. That summer, I decided to hike deep into the park, far beyond the popular trails, to a small clearing I had discovered on a map years ago. The hike was grueling, but the reward was worth it. The clearing sat beside a narrow creek, surrounded by towering sequoias, their shadows stretching across the forest floor like fingers reaching into the night. I set up my small tent, built a modest fire, and settled in for a quiet evening. As darkness fell, the forest became alive with nocturnal sounds. Crickets, distant owls, and the occasional rustling in the underbrush. At first, I felt comforted by the natural orchestra. But as the moon rose higher, I started to feel as though I was being watched, though the trees around me were empty and still. After dinner, I sat by the fire, sipping water and trying to relax. The forest was silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. That's when I heard it. A faint snap of a branch, somewhere just beyond the circle of firelight. I froze. At first, I told myself it was just an animal, probably a deer. But then I realized something was off. The snap wasn't light or timid. It was deliberate, heavy, as if someone or something was trying to make its presence known. I scanned the dark forest with my flashlight, the beam cutting through the shadows. Nothing. I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that solitude came with minor scares like this. Still, the feeling of eyes on me persisted. Every crack of wood, every movement of leaves made my pulse jump. By midnight, the forest felt different. It wasn't just alive with sounds. It felt aware, watching, waiting, and following me in silence. Around 1 a.m., I decided to go to sleep, hoping the morning light would ease my growing unease. The fire had mostly died down, leaving only glowing embers that barely lit the clearing. As I crawled into my tent, I heard it again, the snap of a branch, closer this time. I froze. Then a low, almost inaudible whisper drifted through the trees. At first, I couldn't make out the words. It didn't sound human, but it mimicked the rhythm of speech. I unzipped the tent slightly, straining my eyes into the darkness. The forest was still, yet the air felt charged, almost alive. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the faint glow of the embers. I blinked. It was tall and thin, unnaturally still, its head tilted slightly as if observing me. My heart pounded, and I realized something terrifying. The figure hadn't moved in the time I'd been staring. And yet, it had somehow gotten closer. Panic surged through me. I fumbled for my flashlight inside the tent, finally flicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the swaying shadows of trees. When I looked again, the figure was gone. I exhaled shakily, trying to convince myself it had been a trick of the firelight. But then I heard it. The sound of leaves crunching, soft but deliberate, coming from all around the clearing. My pulse raced. I grabbed a hiking stick, my hands trembling. Every instinct screamed to run, but where would I go? The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, and my car was miles away. Suddenly, a whisper cut through the night. This time, it was clearer. Lila. I froze. My name, spoken in a tone like my own voice, but slower, deeper, warped. The sound didn't come from a single spot. It moved with the wind, circling me. I realized, with a shiver, that I was trapped in its game, completely alone. I stayed frozen inside the tent, gripping my hiking stick like a lifeline. The whispering continued, drifting from tree to tree, always calling my name in that unnatural, warped voice. After what felt like hours, but could only have been minutes, I forced myself to peek outside. The moonlight revealed the clearing empty, save for the faint glow of the dying embers. Nothing. Then movement caught my eye. Something tall and dark darted between the massive sequoias, moving unnaturally fast for something so large. My stomach twisted. I fumbled with my pack, realizing I had no way to call for help. My phone had no signal. My only option was to try to hike out, but the forest was a labyrinth at night. As I zipped up my tent to prepare, the whisper came again, this time from directly behind me. "Don't leave." I spun around, flashlight shaking in my hands. The beam caught the figure for a split second. Thin, elongated, and eerily human-like. It seemed to glide rather than walk. Then it vanished into the shadows. I forced myself to step out of the tent, moving as quietly as possible toward my pack. Every snap of a twig underfoot made my heart jump. The clearing, so peaceful during the day, now felt like a trap. Every shadow a potential predator. The whispering continued, echoing through the trees, sometimes close, sometimes far. Each time it called my name, it felt like the figure was testing me, learning my reactions. I tried to remember the trail back to my car. It was faintly marked, but in the moonlight, it looked like a maze. My legs shook as I stepped cautiously forward. Then I tripped. My flashlight skidded across the forest floor, illuminating the ground for a few seconds before plunging everything back into darkness. And in that brief glow, I saw it again. The tall figure was standing at the edge of the clearing, motionless, head tilted, watching me. I froze. Its presence wasn't just threatening, it felt hungry, as if it had been waiting for me all night. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat as I stared at the figure. It didn't move a muscle, yet I somehow knew it knew exactly where I was. The whispering returned, circling me in the darkness. "Lila, come closer," it said. Slower this time, almost taunting. My legs trembled, but instinct took over. I needed to run. I snatched my backpack and bolted toward the faint trail I had used earlier. Every step was deafened by the crunch of leaves and twigs underfoot. The forest, which had seemed so serene during the day, now twisted and shifted around me, hiding familiar landmarks. Then I heard it behind me. A heavy, gliding step, faster than any human could move. I dared a glance over my shoulder and saw it following, impossibly fast, blending with the shadows, yet keeping pace perfectly. Panic clawed at me, but I forced my legs to move faster, dodging tree roots and low branches. My flashlight flickered wildly, and the whispering grew louder, closer, and more insistent. I didn't dare look behind me again. Every instinct screamed that it was gaining on me. My lungs burned, legs ached, but the forest seemed endless, each turn of the trail leading to more darkness. The whispering grew frantic. It wasn't just calling my name anymore. It was imitating my own footsteps, my own breathing, mocking me. My stomach turned as I realized it had learned me. Suddenly, the trail opened into a small clearing. I thought maybe I could catch my bearings. But as I stepped into the moonlight, I froze. There, at the far edge of the clearing, the figure stood fully upright. Its height was unnatural, almost scraping the lower branches, its head tilted slightly, observing. But the worst part? Its face was starting to resemble mine, like a twisted reflection in the darkness. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. I realized then that running might not matter. Whatever this thing was, it didn't just follow you. It could become you. I turned and ran blindly, my flashlight swinging wildly, illuminating only fleeting glimpses of twisted tree trunks. Every sound of leaves crunching made me flinch. The whispering followed, now layered, my own voice echoing, mocking every step. Suddenly, I tripped over a root and fell hard. The flashlight spun across the ground, landing on its side. The beam caught the figure for just a second. It had stepped closer. Its elongated limbs stretched unnaturally, and its face, it was almost entirely my own. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding. The clearing seemed to stretch endlessly, each tree like a silent witness. The figure glided closer, and I realized it wasn't moving like a human. It was sliding forward, effortless, inevitable. I screamed, pounding through the forest, but the trees twisted, trails disappearing behind me. The whispering grew louder now all around me. And then I felt it, a cold touch on my shoulder. When I spun, there was nothing. Yet I knew it was there, watching, waiting. I stumbled forward until I couldn't see anything but darkness. My chest heaved, and my mind screamed at me to keep moving. Then, the whispering stopped. Silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. I froze, trying to hear anything at all, but the forest held its breath. A faint glow appeared ahead. My heart leapt. Could it be my car, the trail? Someone coming? I sprinted toward it. When I reached it, the glow wasn't a lantern or a headlight. It was my own campfire, perfectly relit, flames dancing as though it had never gone out. And then I saw it. The figure stood at the edge of the clearing, perfectly still. Slowly, it lifted its head. My face stared back at me. My voice called out from the shadows. I never reached my car. By morning, park rangers found the camp, empty except for a perfectly intact tent and deep tally marks carved into the nearest tree, and faintly whispered over the wind. Next time. My name is Marcus Reed, and this happened during a solo hiking trip in Rocky Mountain National Park back in 2018. I had always loved long treks into the backcountry. There's a serenity in walking miles of empty trail with nothing but the wind and trees for company. That spring, I planned a multi-day hike through a remote section of the park, far from roads or other hikers. The trail I chose wound through dense pine forests and steep ridges that seemed untouched for decades. The first night I camped in a small clearing beside a rocky outcrop. I lit a fire, ate my dinner, and settled into my tent. Everything seemed peaceful until I began hearing it. At first, I thought it was the wind, soft, whispering through the pine needles. But then I realized the sound was different. It wasn't wind at all. It was the pines themselves, moaning almost like they were crying. The sound sent chills down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was imagination. But as the darkness deepened, the crying grew louder, more desperate. I unzipped my tent slightly and peeked outside. The moonlight revealed the clearing, but everything seemed normal, except the pines. Their branches swayed even though the air was calm, and the low moaning continued, like a chorus of silent screams. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it across the forest floor. The light cut through the shadows, revealing the dense underbrush. I tried to find something that could explain the sound, an animal maybe, but saw nothing. Then I noticed movement, small shadows flitting between the trees just at the edge of visibility. I froze. The shadows didn't move like animals. They moved too deliberately, like something stalking. My heart began to race. The crying sound intensified, rhythmic now, almost as if it were responding to me. I felt a strange pressure in the air, heavy and suffocating. That night, I learned that the forest didn't just watch. It listened, and it didn't like being ignored. By midnight, I could no longer ignore the sound. The crying of the pines was louder, sharper, almost like the forest itself was in pain. Each gust of wind, or what I thought was wind, made the trees sway in unnatural ways, their branches scraping against each other with a metallic groan. I grabbed my hiking stick and stepped out of the tent, trying to follow the trail that led deeper into the woods. The flashlight barely penetrated the dense darkness, and every shadow seemed alive. I felt eyes on me, though I saw no creature. Then I heard it, a low rasping whisper coming from behind a cluster of pines. I froze. The sound wasn't human, yet it mimicked human speech. "Why are you here?" My pulse jumped. I strained to see, sweeping the flashlight across the trees. For a moment, nothing appeared. Then I noticed movement. A dark figure, hunched and almost blending into the tree trunks. It moved with impossible speed, disappearing behind the dense pines before I could get a full look. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, my flashlight swinging wildly. The whispering continued, circling me, sometimes from the left, sometimes from the right, as if multiple voices were mocking and surrounding me. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the night, that exhaustion and isolation were playing with my mind. But deep down, I knew this forest had a presence. Something older than humans, something that didn't want me here. The dark figure appeared again, just beyond the edge of the flashlight's reach. Its shape was elongated, limbs unnaturally long, head tilted unnaturally, and it moved with a fluidity that made my stomach twist. Suddenly, a branch snapped directly behind me. I whirled around, shining the light, but saw nothing. Then another snap, closer, and the whispering voice repeated my own breathing. I realized with a shiver that the forest wasn't just alive. It was aware of me, aware of every move I made, and it wasn't going to let me leave unchallenged. I tried to move quietly along the trail, every step feeling heavier than the last. The forest seemed to stretch endlessly, the trees closing in around me. Each time I glanced behind, the shadows shifted, giving the illusion that the dark figure was closer than before. The whispering intensified, no longer just imitating me. It began calling my fears aloud, speaking of being lost, of being forgotten, of the cold pine needles scraping against my skin. I clutched my hiking stick like a weapon, even though I knew nothing I had could stop this. Then I saw it. A tall, thin shadow emerging from the trees, gliding toward me effortlessly. Its elongated limbs moved in unnatural angles, and its head swiveled as though it could see me even in the dark. I ran blindly, slipping on roots and rocks, hearing the soft crunch of branches behind me. Every instinct screamed to escape, but the forest seemed to bend and twist, erasing the trail I had come from, keeping me inside its grasp. I stumbled into a small clearing, hoping for open space, but the whispering didn't stop. It surrounded me, echoing from every direction. The figure didn't just follow. It loomed, moving silently among the shadows, just at the edge of my vision. I tried calling out for help, but my voice seemed to vanish into the thick air. My flashlight flickered, and in the brief moments of light, I caught glimpses of other shapes. More shadows, taller, stretching toward me like the trees themselves were coming alive. The forest floor seemed to shift beneath my feet. Fallen branches and rocks appeared to rise and block my path. I realized with growing horror that the forest wasn't just alive. It was hunting me. Suddenly, the whispering became a chorus of voices, each one mimicking my own, laughing, mocking, pleading, all at once. My chest tightened. I knew then that the forest didn't just want to scare me. It wanted to claim me. I stumbled forward, desperate to find any sign of the trail. My flashlight flickered, barely piercing the darkness, and every shadow looked like a pair of glowing eyes waiting for me. The whispering followed, circling me, mocking my every move. Then I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. The dark figure appeared again, taller than any human, limbs bending unnaturally, head tilted like it was studying me. Its presence was suffocating, a weight pressing against my chest. Panic took over. I ran blindly through the forest, branches slapping my face, roots tangling my feet. But no matter how fast I moved, I couldn't escape the whispering. It was inside my head now, repeating my fears, my regrets, even my thoughts I hadn't spoken aloud. Suddenly, I tripped and fell into a shallow ditch. My flashlight skittered out of reach. In the faint moonlight, I saw the figure glide to the edge of the ditch, tilting its head toward me, unblinking, patient, hungry. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and tried to navigate the forest blindly. Every step felt heavier, the underbrush tangled around my ankles, and the whispering voices were relentless, echoing from all directions. The figure glided silently between the trees, always at the periphery of my vision, yet somehow moving faster than I could run. I shouted, screamed, begged it to leave me alone. But no sound returned. Only the eerie chorus of whispers mocking me. I came upon a narrow ridge overlooking a small valley. My hope surged. I could see faint lights of a distant ranger station. Maybe I could make it. Then the figure appeared on the ridge behind me, almost impossibly close. My stomach churned when I realized its face was partially human, partially tree bark, twisted like the forest itself. It didn't move aggressively yet, but the air around it was thick, cold, and heavy. I knew it was only a matter of time before it decided I didn't belong alive in its forest. I froze on the ridge, my breath ragged, knowing I couldn't outrun it. The figure didn't chase. It followed with patience, like a predator that knew it had all the time in the world. The whispering voices surged, overlapping with my own thoughts, calling my name, telling me to stop, to lie down, to let the forest take me. My hands shook as I grabbed my flashlight and swung it toward the figure. The beam illuminated its twisted form, tall elongated limbs, bending in impossible angles. Bark-like skin cracking as though alive, its face a warped reflection of me. I stumbled backward, almost falling off the ridge, but managed to regain my footing. The forest around me felt alive, branches snapping, pine needles scratching my arms, shadows shifting unnaturally. In that moment, I realized the forest didn't just want me to flee. It wanted me to join it, to become one with the trees, to vanish completely. I could feel its presence closing in, patient and inevitable. I made one final desperate move, sprinting toward the faint lights of the ranger station below. My legs burned, lungs on fire, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly, each step feeling slower as if the ground itself resisted me. The whispering reached a fever pitch, now a cacophony of voices. Mine, others I didn't recognize, all pleading, mocking, chanting. I glanced behind. The figure hovered on the ridge, unmoving, yet somehow closer than before, as if the forest itself carried it. I leapt over a fallen log, tears streaming, praying I could make it. Then, just as I neared the edge of the tree line, I slipped. I hit the ground hard, losing the flashlight. In the brief flash of moonlight, I saw hundreds of shadowy figures emerging from the forest, their faces all warped and bark-like, stretching toward me. When I woke hours later, I was at the ranger station, alive but alone. My backpack was gone. The trail was empty. The only sound was the whisper of the pines, faint but unmistakable. You belong to us now. My name is Samantha Hayes, and this happened during a weekend getaway in Olympic National Park in 2020. I had rented a small, remote cabin for some solitude. The park's dense forests and rugged coastline promised peace, but the isolation also brought a strange sense of vulnerability. The cabin was accessible only via a narrow, winding road, and cell service was spotty at best. I arrived just before sunset, the fog rolling in from the coast, swallowing the trees and cliffs in a ghostly gray haze. I unpacked quickly, lit the fireplace, and tried to relax. Everything felt surreal. Beautiful, yes, but also oppressive in its silence. By nightfall, the fog thickened, and the forest beyond the cabin seemed to shift in the dim light. The wind whispered through the pines, but beneath it, I began to hear something else. A faint scratching, almost deliberate, coming from outside the cabin. I told myself it was just branches, animals, or the settling of the old cabin. But the sound had a rhythm, like someone pacing just beyond the window. I tried to ignore the scratching and focus on making dinner. The wind howled outside, and the fog pressed against the windows, blurring the shapes of the surrounding trees. Then came a knock. Soft, deliberate, almost human. My heart froze. I told myself no one could have reached the cabin in this fog. No car, no footpath. But the knocking continued, rhythmic and patient. I approached the window cautiously, peeking through the thick fog. Nothing. The forest seemed empty, silent, yet the knocking persisted. Now on the back door, then on the walls of the cabin itself. A low, almost imperceptible whisper came from the darkness outside. My name. I stepped back, terrified. The cabin, which had seemed cozy and secure moments ago, now felt trapped in a living nightmare. Every shadow seemed to move, and I realized the fog wasn't just mist. It was hiding something. Something waiting for me to make a wrong move. I could feel eyes on me from the forest, patient, watching, and utterly silent. I decided to stay inside and keep the doors locked, hoping the fog and the unseen visitor would leave me alone. But the scratching didn't stop. It moved from wall to wall, sometimes above the windows, sometimes along the porch, almost as if circling the cabin. I tried to focus on the fire, but every crackle sounded like footsteps pacing just outside. My imagination might have played tricks, except the knocks and scratches were too deliberate, too rhythmic to be anything natural. Then I saw it. A shadow, enormous and dark, slinking through the fog, moving closer to the cabin. It didn't step. It glided, silent and smooth, yet deliberate. I grabbed a flashlight and flung it toward the window. The beam cut through the fog for a split second, revealing the faint outline of a tall, hunched figure. Its head was tilted unnaturally, its limbs long and thin. Then, just as quickly, it vanished into the mist. My pulse hammered. Whatever it wasn't going anywhere. I paced the cabin, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. The fog pressed against the windows, thick and suffocating, muffling the distant sound of waves crashing against the coast. Then I heard it again. Soft breathing, uneven and wet, right outside the door. I held my breath, every nerve on fire. The knocking returned, this time accompanied by faint dragging sounds across the porch. I picked up a kitchen knife, shaking, and approached the door. My flashlight trembled in my other hand. I could see nothing but fog. The shadows seemed to twist and writhe, like the mist itself was alive. A whisper came, chilling and close. "Samantha, come out." I stumbled backward. The voice was my own, warped and slow, echoing through the fog. I realized then that whatever was outside didn't just want to scare me. It wanted me alone, vulnerable, trapped in the mist. The fog had become a predator, and I was its prey. I could no longer stay still. The fog pressed against the cabin walls, heavier than ever, as though it were a living thing trying to force me outside. My hands shook as I gripped the knife and flashlight, unsure if either would protect me. Suddenly, a loud bang shook the cabin door. My heart leapt into my throat. Someone, or something, was trying to enter. I backed away, pressing myself against the far wall. The fog outside seemed to swirl unnaturally, forming shapes that mimicked human silhouettes, only taller, thinner, and twisted. I thought of running to my car, but the fog had erased the driveway. Every attempt to look outside revealed only shifting gray, with fleeting glimpses of the tall figure hovering, silent, watching. Then came the whisper again, low and guttural. "You can't hide." I realized with terror that the figure didn't need to open the door. The fog itself could reach me, and the cabin was no longer a refuge. It was a cage. I backed toward the fireplace, trying to convince myself I could survive the night inside. The knocking and dragging continued, now from all sides of the cabin. The fog pressed against every window, shaping itself into long, reaching limbs that scratched at the glass and wood. I screamed, hoping someone, anyone, would hear. But the fog swallowed the sound. The fireplace flickered and dimmed, casting the cabin into near darkness. Shadows danced across the walls, elongating, twisting like the figures outside. Suddenly, I saw a silhouette through the fog. A tall figure, hunched and motionless, yet impossibly close. Its limbs were elongated, thin, almost tree-like, and its head tilted unnaturally, watching. Then the whispering grew louder, layering multiple voices, each mimicking my own. Terrified, pleading, mocking. My throat tightened, and a cold dread filled me. The fog was no longer just outside. It had infiltrated the cabin, seeping beneath the door and around the walls. I realized the terrifying truth. It could reach me anywhere. I realized I couldn't stay near the windows or doors. The fog, and whatever was in it, was stronger there. I backed toward the center of the cabin, trying to keep the fireplace between me and the darkness. My knife felt useless. My flashlight flickered weakly, and the whispering grew into a cacophony of voices, pleading, mocking, calling my name. Then I heard it. The dragging footsteps inside the cabin, soft but deliberate. My blood ran cold. The fog hadn't just pressed against the cabin. It had entered, carrying something with it. The firelight cast shadows across the walls, and I caught glimpses of shapes that weren't human, stretching and twisting in impossible ways. I tried to move silently toward the back door, hoping to escape, but each step felt like it was slowed by unseen hands. The whispering followed me, relentless. Then I saw it. The tall, thin figure, now fully inside the cabin, its head tilted, limbs bending unnaturally, and eyes that glowed faintly through the fog. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. Its presence was enough to paralyze me. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the rug. My flashlight fell, spinning its beam across the room, catching the figure in glimpses. Long arms bending at impossible angles, head tilted unnaturally, and an aura of pure menace. The whispering voices had become a chorus of my own fears, echoing in my mind. "Come outside, join us," it said, layered and distorted as if the fog itself were speaking. I knew I had to escape or I wouldn't survive. I grabbed the knife and rushed past the figure toward the back door. The fog swirled violently, resisting my movement, twisting around my legs like living ropes. I yanked open the door, and the cold night air hit me. The figure didn't move aggressively. It glided silently just outside, perfectly still, observing me. I realized then that the fog and the figure were one entity, patient, watching, waiting for me to make a mistake. I ran into the night, heart hammering, and didn't stop. Not yet. I ran blindly into the fog, branches whipping my face, my flashlight long forgotten on the cabin floor. Every step felt like moving through water. The mist clinging to me, heavy, purposeful, alive. The whispering followed, circling me, voices distorted, overlapping, calling my name and mocking my every fear. Then I glimpsed movement ahead, another figure, or the same one, gliding silently through the thick gray haze. Its elongated limbs seemed to stretch unnaturally, merging with the fog itself. I stumbled and fell, my hands scraping against cold rocks and damp roots, my heart hammering so loud I thought it might give me away. A voice echoed, close, right in my ear, yet I saw no one. "You can't leave. Not yet." I scrambled to my feet, running faster than I thought possible. The fog swirling around me, almost herding me along a path I didn't recognize. The forest, the mist, and the figure were all one predator, patient, and I was the prey it had been waiting for. I finally saw faint lights in the distance. Relief surged. I thought they were the road or a ranger station. But the fog twisted, stretching the lights into elongated, distorted forms. I approached cautiously, heart hammering, hoping for safety. Then I realized I was no longer alone. The tall figure appeared at the edge of the light, gliding silently, limbs bending unnaturally. Behind it, the fog rippled, and dark shapes moved, almost like a living wall closing in. I ran the last few yards, tripping into shallow water near a small creek. The figure stopped at the edge, unmoving, head tilted, eyes faintly glowing. I dared a glance back. The mist behind it swirled and shifted, forming a thick wall of darkness, alive and watching, stretching infinitely. By morning, search teams found the cabin empty, fog dissipated, no signs of struggle, except a trail of footprints leading from the door straight into the forest, and none returning. The fog had claimed its visitor, and the whispering still haunts me in dreams. next time. My name is Ethan Carter, and this happened during a solo backpacking trip in Yosemite National Park in the summer of 2019. I had been hiking for several days on a lesser-known trail, seeking solitude and the thrill of untouched wilderness. The trail wound through dense forests, sheer cliffs, and narrow ridges. It was breathtaking, but also isolated and unforgiving. I had a map, GPS, and enough supplies, but nothing could prepare me for what was to come. On the third day, I noticed the trail becoming oddly difficult to follow. Roots and rocks seemed to shift, and markers I was sure I had passed vanished. I paused, scanning the trees. The forest felt heavier, quieter, almost like it was watching me. I shrugged it off, assuming I had lost my bearings. But as night fell, the sense of being observed grew stronger. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, and distant noises, branches snapping, faint whispers, made my pulse quicken. I realized then that this was no ordinary hike, and the forest held secrets it would not let me leave easily. By nightfall, I set up camp on a small clearing near a ridge. I built a fire, trying to calm my nerves, but the forest around me felt alive. The air was thick and still, the usual wildlife silent, replaced by an unnatural quiet. That's when I heard it. Soft footsteps, not mine, approaching from the trees. My heart raced. I scanned the darkness with my flashlight, but saw nothing. The trail markers I had been following earlier had disappeared completely, replaced by a maze of identical trees and shadows. Then came a whisper, low and deliberate. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, convinced it was just my imagination. But the whisper repeated, closer this time, and I could hear the snap of twigs under weight that wasn't mine. Panic set in. The forest no longer felt safe. It felt hungry, patient, and aware. I knew my choices now would determine if I could survive until dawn or vanish forever. I decided to stay awake, my fire crackling weakly as the night deepened. The forest around me was unnaturally still, yet I could feel movement just beyond the firelight. Every time I glanced toward the trail, it seemed to shift, roots and rocks rearranging themselves into unfamiliar patterns. I tried to convince myself it was fatigue or paranoia, but the whispers continued, faint and deliberate, echoing through the trees. "Turn back, or stay forever," they said, almost coaxing, almost threatening. I picked up my backpack and flashlight, deciding to move cautiously. The trail, however, no longer resembled the path I had followed. Every ridge looked identical, every tree a twin of the last. I walked for hours, only to find the trail behind me erased. The markers I had passed vanished without a trace. Panic began to set in. I realized the forest was not passive. It was actively reshaping itself, feeding on fear and confusion, and I was trapped in its labyrinth. I forced myself to keep moving, but the forest seemed to mock my efforts. Every path I took led me back to the same clearing, the same ridge, as if the world itself were folding in on me. The whispers became louder, more urgent, overlapping my own thoughts. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Not a soft, careful pace, but deliberate, heavy, and synchronized with my own heartbeats. I spun, flashlight sweeping across the trees, and caught glimpses of a tall figure gliding silently through the shadows, limbs unnaturally elongated, head tilted as if observing me. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and tripped over a gnarled root. When I looked up, the trail ahead had vanished. The forest seemed alive, watching, reshaping itself around me, keeping me inside. The realization hit me. The forest didn't just contain me, it controlled me. My only hope of survival was to outsmart it, and I had no idea if that was even possible. I forced myself to move forward, despite the gnawing fear tightening my chest. Each step felt heavier, as though the forest itself resisted my presence. Roots tangling my feet and branches slapping my face. The trail continued to vanish behind me, leaving nothing but a wall of trees and fog. The whispers grew louder, now taunting me, repeating my own thoughts in distorted tones. Lost. Lost. Forever. They hissed. I swung my flashlight in desperation, catching a fleeting glimpse of the tall figure. Its limbs bent unnaturally, head tilted, gliding silently between the trees, never breaking pace, never blinking. I ran blindly, hoping to reach a clearing or a familiar landmark. But the forest had erased all landmarks, all sense of direction. Every ridge, every rock, every tree looked identical, as if the forest was folding in on itself. By now, I realized the horrifying truth. The forest wasn't just confusing me, it was hunting me, shaping reality to keep me trapped inside its living labyrinth. I stumbled into another small clearing, heart pounding, sweat and fog clinging to me. The whispers became urgent, almost panicked, overlapping with my own thoughts. You cannot leave. Then I saw them. Not just one figure, but multiple. Tall, elongated, shadowy forms, moving silently through the fog. Their presence was oppressive, like the air itself had weight, pushing down on me. I tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the dense forest. I swung my flashlight frantically, catching glimpses of limbs bending unnaturally, bodies gliding between trees, heads tilting at impossible angles. The forest wasn't just alive, it was patrolling, herding me toward something. I ran, zigzagging through the underbrush. But the trees seemed to shift subtly with every step, closing in, erasing paths, creating new obstacles. It became clear. The forest and the figures were one entity, a predator patient and omnipotent. My only chance of survival was to reach the edge, but I had no idea if the edge even existed anymore. I reached another ridge, gasping for air, hoping it would lead me to a recognizable path. But the forest had other plans. The fog thickened, curling around the trees, transforming familiar shapes into twisted, nightmarish forms. Shadows stretched and moved on their own, and the whispers became a chorus, chanting my name in distorted tones. I caught glimpses of the figures again, tall, thin, gliding silently between the pines. Their presence was magnetic, almost pulling me toward them. Each step I took felt heavier, as though invisible hands held me back, urging me to surrender. In desperation, I tried to run downhill, but the forest seemed to shift under my feet, rocks and roots rearranging to block my path. Every ridge I reached looked the same. Every tree was a mirror of the last. The realization hit me. The forest wasn't just alive, it was intelligent, patient, and hunting me, learning my movements, anticipating my actions, and preparing for the moment I would make a mistake. I stumbled into a narrow valley, my legs trembling. The fog pressed down, thicker than ever, almost solid in texture, swallowing every sound except the whispering voices that surrounded me. They weren't just voices anymore. They were thoughts, intrusive, invasive, echoing inside my mind. I glimpsed movement at the edges of the fog, one figure, then another, gliding closer. Their limbs were impossibly long, bending at angles no human body should allow, their heads tilted unnaturally as if studying me. I tried to run, zigzagging through the underbrush, but the forest seemed to reshape itself constantly, erasing every escape route, funneling me deeper into its trap. The whispers had grown into a cacophony of distorted voices, overlapping my own, each one taunting and warning. Fear consumed me, and I realized that no matter how fast I ran or how carefully I tried to navigate, the forest and its figures controlled the path, controlling me, leading me toward an inevitable confrontation I was powerless to avoid. By the early hours of the morning, exhaustion weighed me down, but I could not stop. The forest seemed to anticipate every move, closing off paths behind me while opening new ones that led nowhere. Each step forward was a battle against unseen forces. Roots and branches tangled my feet, and fog twisted unnaturally, forming shapes that mocked my panic. The figures appeared again, gliding just at the edge of visibility. Their heads tilted unnaturally, and their elongated limbs seemed to stretch into the mist itself. I could feel their presence pressing on my chest, suffocating me, while the whispers echoed inside my mind. You cannot leave. You belong here. I ran blindly, following faint moonlight, hoping it would lead me out. But the trail had vanished entirely. Every rock, every tree, every ridge was identical, mirrored by the forest. I realized then with cold certainty, this was no ordinary forest. It was alive, intelligent, and had claimed me as its prey, guiding me into a trap I might never escape. Exhausted and desperate, I stumbled into a small clearing, thinking I saw the faint glow of dawn. Relief surged, but it was a mirage. The fog shifted around me, forming walls that closed in from every side, and the figures appeared, multiple, silent, gliding toward me. I froze. The whispers became a chorus of my own voice, distorted and layered. Stay. Never leave. Lost forever. My flashlight had died hours ago. I could see only vague shapes in the dense fog. I tried to run, but the forest seemed to bend reality, stretching distances, twisting familiar landmarks, keeping me inside its labyrinth. The figures moved closer, silent and patient. I realized then that the forest wasn't just a location. It was a sentient predator, and the figures were extensions of its will. When I finally awoke hours later, I was at the trailhead, alone. No signs of struggle, no footprints leading into the woods. The forest had returned to normal, but the whispers still echo in my mind. My name is Lila Morgan, and this happened during a summer camping trip with friends in Rocky Mountain National Park in 2021. We were 5 in total, close friends who had done multiple camping trips before. But nothing had prepared us for what we encountered that night. We set up camp near a small, secluded clearing surrounded by dense pines and jagged rocks. The air was crisp, almost unnaturally still, and the forest seemed to press in around us, silent except for the occasional rustle of distant wildlife. After dinner, we gathered around the fire, laughing and joking, until one of us noticed another campfire flickering faintly in the distance. Too far for any other group we knew to have been there. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to investigate. As we approached, the fire suddenly vanished, leaving the clearing empty. The forest was silent again, but a strange sensation of being watched pressed down on us. I knew instinctively that something wasn't right. Someone was out there, observing our every move. We returned to our own campsite, trying to laugh off the eerie feeling. But the forest had changed. Shadows seemed to move differently, twisting unnaturally in the firelight, and the air felt thicker, almost electric. Later, as we were settling in our tents, one of my friends whispered, "Did anyone else hear footsteps near the edge of the trees?" We froze. The night was silent, too silent. But there it was again, faint snapping of twigs, moving closer in a rhythmic pattern, circling our camp. I grabbed a flashlight, sweeping it across the tree line. Nothing, just darkness. Yet the feeling of eyes on us refused to go away. Then came a soft whisper, chilling and deliberate. Leave, or stay forever. The hairs on my neck stood up. None of us had spoken. The forest had made its presence known, patient, waiting, and hungry. We huddled together, realizing that tonight's woods weren't just quiet. They were alive with something unseen and malevolent. We tried to shake off the fear, convincing ourselves it was just our imagination, or perhaps another group of campers playing tricks. But then we heard voices, faint at first, calling our names. They weren't whispers. They were distinct, deliberate, and eerily familiar. I froze, shining my flashlight toward the trees. Shadows shifted unnaturally between the trunks, and for a split second, I could make out figures, tall, thin, and completely motionless, yet somehow moving with the foggy night air. Every attempt to focus on them made them vanish into darkness. My friends whispered frantically, each claiming to see the same figures in different positions. The fire flickered violently, casting long, distorted shadows across the campsite. The forest seemed to breathe with us, pressing closer as if testing our nerves, calculating our panic. Then one of the figures appeared at the edge of the clearing, standing just beyond the firelight. Its head tilted unnaturally, limbs elongated, and it didn't move. But the air around it shivered with menace, as if the forest itself were watching through it. Panic set in as we realized the figures were mirroring our movements. When we stepped closer to the fire, they seemed to inch forward in perfect synchronicity, always just out of reach. The forest around us grew darker, the shadows stretching unnaturally, and the whispering became a chorus of overlapping voices, echoing our own fears. I tried to reason aloud, urging my friends to stay calm, but every word felt swallowed by the thick night air. One of the figures shifted slightly, limbs bending in ways no human could, head tilting unnaturally, and I could feel its gaze penetrating my very thoughts. The forest wasn't just hiding them. It was empowering them, giving them dominion over the clearing. Every attempt to flee seemed calculated to fail, the ground and trees subtly shifting to herd us toward the center. We realized, with growing dread, that we weren't just being watched. The forest had sentient intent, and the phantom campers were its extensions, patient predators, waiting for us to make a fatal mistake. The night pressed in on us like a living thing. Every crackle of the fire seemed amplified. Every snap of a branch made our hearts leap. I could feel the phantom campers circling us, their presence so tangible that it pressed against my skin like cold, invisible hands. We tried to leave, but the forest seemed to reshape itself, forcing us back toward the clearing. Each attempt to take a different path ended with the trees and fog closing ranks, guiding us where the figures wanted. The whispers grew louder, almost chanting our names in unison, and every shadow seemed to move independently, reaching toward us. One of my friends screamed when a figure appeared just beyond the firelight, limbs bending unnaturally, head tilted, watching us silently. We could see nothing human in their form, yet it mimicked our motions perfectly, as if the forest itself had animated these apparitions. We realized with growing horror that the forest didn't just contain them. They were the forest, extensions of its will, and we were now its prey. The whispering became overwhelming, layered voices echoing inside my skull, repeating fears I hadn't voiced aloud. I gripped a flashlight and swung it wildly, trying to catch a figure. But they vanished with the fog, reappearing closer in seconds, their movements impossibly fluid. Panic surged. I grabbed my friends, urging them to run toward a faintly visible trail. But the forest seemed to shift under our feet, erasing the path we tried to follow. Every attempt to escape only funneled us back toward the center of the clearing, the fire now a small island surrounded by fog. Then I saw one figure step fully into the firelight. Its limbs bent in unnatural angles, head tilted, eyes dark voids reflecting the flames. The air around it shimmered, heavy and cold, and the whispers crescendoed into a cacophony of mocking voices, echoing the terror inside us. We realized the forest had entrapped us, and the phantom campers were not just specters. They were hunters, extensions of a conscious, malevolent wilderness, determined to keep us inside. We huddled together, hearts pounding, as the figures edged closer. The forest seemed to breathe with them, the fog curling unnaturally, shadows stretching and twisting around our campsite. Every movement we made was mirrored, every sound amplified in the silence. I tried to remain calm, whispering instructions to my friends, but the forest warped reality around us. The fire flickered violently, throwing our shadows across the trees in distorted forms, and the phantom campers moved with perfect precision, never breaking rhythm. Their heads tilted unnaturally, limbs bending at impossible angles, eyes hollow yet somehow piercing into our very thoughts. Suddenly, one figure darted forward, gliding silently through the fog to the edge of the firelight. Its presence was oppressive, almost physically pressing down on us, and the whispers became a chorus of distorted voices, overlapping our own. We realized with growing horror that there was no way out. The forest and its phantom campers were patient predators, herding us toward a trap, and any attempt to flee would play right into their hands. The panic was unbearable. Every time we attempted to run toward the edge of the clearing, the forest seemed to shift subtly, guiding us back to the center. The phantom campers moved effortlessly through the fog, gliding closer with each attempt, limbs bending in ways that defied nature. Their heads tilted, observing, studying, anticipating every move. The whispers intensified, repeating our names, mocking our fear, and echoing our thoughts back at us. One of my friends screamed as a figure appeared almost inside the firelight, standing impossibly tall, limbs stretched unnaturally, and these dark voids that reflected our terror. We were trapped in a living nightmare, a forest that wasn't just alive, but sentient, using the phantom campers as extensions of its will. Every breath felt heavy, each movement calculated by an unseen intelligence. It was clear that this night wasn't about escape. The forest had chosen us, and the phantom campers were hunters ensuring we would not leave without facing their malevolent judgment. By midnight, exhaustion had set in, but fear kept us alert. Every shadow, every flicker of movement seemed magnified. The phantom campers were no longer distant. They were all around us, moving silently between the fog and trees. Each of their elongated limbs bent at impossible angles, gliding toward us in a predatory rhythm. I tried to convince myself it was a hallucination, but one of my friends screamed, pointing directly at a figure emerging from the mist. Its head tilted unnaturally, and hollow eyes reflected our terrified faces in the firelight. The forest itself seemed to pulse with life, controlling the fog, the shadows, and the movements of these figures. Every attempt to flee ended with the forest shifting subtly, closing off paths and guiding us back toward the center of the clearing. The whispers crescendoed, overlapping our own thoughts, tormenting us with our deepest fears. We understood then that we weren't just visitors. We were prey, ensnared in a sentient, malevolent wilderness with no guaranteed escape. As the first light of dawn threatened to pierce the fog, the forest seemed to relent slightly. But the terror was far from over. The phantom campers hovered at the edges of visibility, their unnatural limbs bending impossibly, heads tilting as if studying every micro-expression of fear. We made a desperate dash toward a faintly visible trail, the whispers now chaotic, screaming in overlapping voices. The forest seemed alive, reshaping itself beneath our feet, rocks and roots shifting to guide us in the direction it wanted. My friend stumbled and fell, hands scraping against rough bark and jagged roots, but I forced them onward. Finally, we broke through the fog into a